This video is sponsored by Ground News. On Friday this week, Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin will sit down face to face in Alaska, a meeting some are calling a potential milestone in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. It could mark the start of a path towards a ceasefire, or just another dead end. The Europeans aren't invited, neither is Zelenskyy. Putin made it very clear that he doesn't want him there. That doesn't sound like a promising start, does it? Nonetheless, we see three possible ways this meeting could play out. And yes, a ceasefire is a possibility, even though the odds remain small. But before we get into that, we need to look at the crazy week that brought us here. Because it all started last Wednesday, when Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, met Putin for a fourth meeting in Moscow. The meeting was immediately hyped as a breakthrough, a great success on the road to a ceasefire. Trump quickly called European allies, including Zelenskyy, to announce that Putin was finally ready to give up on some of his so-called red lines. In Trump's telling, this was basically a territory swap. Here's how he understood it. If Ukraine handed Russia Donetsk and Luhansk, Moscow would pull out of Zaporizhia and Kherson and give them back to Ukraine. For Europe, this was shocking. It would be the first time Putin had shown any willingness to compromise, and a big one at that. After all, Russia's very constitution now explicitly claims that all four oblasts are part of the Russian Federation. For a brief moment, it seemed like real progress. But that did not last long. On Thursday, European leaders held another call, this time with Witkoff alone, and the picture started looking very different. You see, Witkoff, who, to put it politely, is not a Ukraine expert, couldn't answer most of Europe's detailed questions. And this is not surprising. In past interviews, Witkoff has mixed up the four occupied regions and mispronounced their names. By Friday, after yet another call, the truth came out. The actual offer was this. Ukraine abandons Donetsk and Luhansk, and in return, Russia stops fighting in Zaporizhia and Kherson and stops bombing Kiev. That's it. No land back to Ukraine, no meaningful concessions. In fact, this is a terrible deal for Ukraine. You see, Donetsk still contains two major cities and a whole lot of other smaller ones, home to over 1 million people. They are nowhere near in taking those cities. It could take years, if ever. Why would Ukraine give this up for nothing? Especially when Russia continues to lose hundreds of thousands of troops trying to capture these regions. It feels uncomfortably like the Sudetenland in the run-up of the Second World War, handing over territory to an aggressor in the hope they'll stop. So yeah, not acceptable. And the Europeans agreed. On Saturday, together with Zelenskyy, they drafted a counter-proposal to the plan Trump, Witkoff and Putin had been discussing. In other words, the red lines for Ukraine and Europe. First, ceasefire before negotiations, not Putin's way, which demands territory before the shooting stops. Second, any territory talks must be reciprocal. If Ukraine gives something up, Russia must give something up too. And third, everything must be backed by a concrete security guarantee. In theory, that could mean NATO membership. The Europeans have already presented this to J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, and Witkoff, and apparently they were quite receptive. And now, as reported by more than 370 news outlets tracked in our sponsor Ground News, this European position has been handed to Trump, the one he can take with him to Alaska, and hopefully convince Putin of. But how can you tell if what you're reading isn't just drenched in bias? Honestly, it's a huge challenge I face every single day. And that's exactly why this week's sponsor, Ground News, comes in. For this story alone, Ground News found at least 66 left-leaning and 41 right-leaning sources covering it. And the best part, you can either read a clear summary of the coverage or click through and read each article separately for yourself. Want to see the most right-wing perspective? Click this article here, and as you can see, it's not exactly glowing about Europe's peace plan. I also really love their factuality score. Each article, and even podcasts, get rated for accuracy. Like this one right here from a left-leaning outlet with low factuality. I mean, just look at their headline. And here's another brilliant feature, blind spot alerts. They show you the stories your side of the political spectrum isn't talking about at all. So you can break out of the echo chamber and see the bigger picture. And there's loads more. The Ground News app and website are packed with tools to cut through the noise and help you see how and why stories are covered. If you'd like to try it, you can get 40% off unlimited access to the Vantage plan by using the link in the description or scanning the QR code on the screen. Back to the video. So this is the European peace deal proposal, and it will be very tricky waters for Trump to navigate. The gap between the two sides remain enormous. In a nutshell, Putin wants all 4 occupied oblasts plus Crimea formally recognized as Russian territory, a guarantee that Ukraine will never join NATO, and Ukraine's demilitarization, essentially the ability to defend itself only in a very limited way. And Zelenskyy wants all 4 oblasts and Crimea returned to Ukraine, NATO membership or binding US European-backed security guarantees, and continued military and economic support until Russia fully withdraws. There's no overlap on these key issues. And with Russia still pushing offensives on the battlefield, the idea of a durable ceasefire looks very optimistic at best. So what could actually happen in Alaska? Well, we see 3 scenarios, and let's start with the most optimistic one, a ceasefire without concessions from either side. Basically, the European plan. You see, Trump does have serious leverage over Putin, or in his words, he has the cards, and maybe this is the moment he decides to use them. He could impose devastating secondary sanctions. For instance, a 50% tariff on buyers of Russian oil. These tariffs don't target Russia directly. They penalize countries that trade with Russia by cutting them off from US markets and making them pretty much uncompetitive. Trump has already used this tool. He doubled tariffs on Indian goods to 50% as punishment for their continued energy trade with Moscow. And in Washington, a Senate bill proposing 500% tariffs on Russian oil buyers is already on the table, with very strong bipartisan support. But here's the problem. India and China have both rejected the idea of 100% tariffs on Russian oil purchases, calling them infringement on their sovereign right to trade. And while such measures would cause short-term economic pain, neither country seems willing to bend. And China does hold serious counter-leverage. It could retaliate, as it did earlier this year, by restricting export of rare earth metals vital to US industry and defense. And geopolitically, pressuring both China and India at once risks pushing them closer together. That would undo years of US strategy aimed at cultivating India, especially under Prime Minister Modi, as a counterweight to China. The consequences are already clearly visible. Modi is now preparing his first visit to China in 7 years, amid rising tensions with Washington. Then there's possibility 2, the nightmare for Kiev. The danger is that Trump and Putin settle on terms Ukraine finds impossible. For example, Trump might let Putin walk away with everything he wants, control of all 4 regions, no NATO for Ukraine, and no real consequences. And then, when Ukraine will understandably say, hell no, we're not signing, we'll keep fighting. This could become a repeat of that Oval Office moment, when Zelenskyy was accused of refusing peace and risking World War III. This is probably the biggest fear among Ukrainians right now. And then there's scenario 3. Talks end without a breakthrough. Russia might refuse any demands or meaningful compromises, and the meeting wraps up without decisions. Trump, frustrated, might still slap Russia with new sanctions or supply more weapons to Ukraine to show that he's serious. But he could just as easily lose interest. Moving on to the next headline. Here's what I think. It's super hard to predict, but my bet is on scenario 3. Talks end without a breakthrough. I simply don't see Putin giving up his 3 core demands at this point in time. And this meeting risks being just another way to stall for time. That said, there are some positives. Trump does seem to be in closer contact with European leaders lately, and that's a good sign. And Trump has actually been striking a more skeptical tone on Putin in recent weeks. So I am cautiously hoping for the best. Zelenskyy obviously should be invited, regardless of what Putin wants. But for me, it's not a total deal breaker if he isn't. It just means that no decision can be made on the spot in Alaska. If this summit ends without a result though, I really hope Trump finally plays his strongest cards and goes super hard on Russia, full-scale sanctions, and targeting every major revenue stream Moscow still has. And Europe must match that resolve. No more Russian oil, no more Russian gas, and no more loopholes in financial flows. In my view, that's pretty much the only route left to force compromise. maximum economic pressure combined with unwavering military support for Ukraine. Thank you so much for watching, and if you want to dig deeper into media bias and understand how stories are being framed, check out our sponsor, Ground News. You can get 40% off the unlimited Excess Vantage plan by using the link in the description or scanning the QR code on the screen. Thank you so much to our presidents, Jan Schauke, Christian Peter HGVD, Daniel Unite Europe, Stefan Mr. Probot, and Rashid. See you in the next video.